Hi everyone. In last video we have already seen string interpolation, in which the value of the first name property is pulled from the component and inserts it between the opening and closing h2 element using curly braces used to denote interpolation. And now let's have a button save, and if we want to control this button for some scenario where we want to disable enable, and we can specify its attribute as disable, and here we go, button is disabled. To enable, we have to delete disable attribute. In Angular we can control this behavior from class. Like in last video we were communicating from class to template with interpolation. Here we make disabled as with interpolation, but it won't work. Let's have a variable is disabled in which we can dynamically set true or false. To make button enable again, we have to make it false. To make button enable again, we have to make it false. But interpolation only works with string values, not with Boolean. If we decide to use interpolation instead of property binding, the button will always be disabled irrespective of its disabled class property value is true or false. Here we can use property binding. To set an element property to a non-string value, you must use property binding. That is square bracket depicts property binding. Now you may notice by true it's disabled, by false is enabled. Let's have some more examples of property binding where we can use. I am using data binding with image used as interpolation. Now I am changing to property binding with square brackets. You may notice the results are same. We can use an input tag where we want to have value that dynamically comes. For now let's use first name, and I'm changing its value to Angular property binding, and here we go. You may notice input value Angular property binding. Now question came when to use interpolation and property binding. Let's make the difference clear with an example. When we need to concatenate strings, we have to use interpolation instead property binding. Like with heading tags, paragraph, span, use interpolation. And we will want to communicate with properties of the element, use property binding. One other thing I want to introduce is, instead of using pair of square bracket to depict property binding, you can also use canonical form, which is an alternative syntax to square bracket. Use bind hyphen with the property for property binding. You may notice results are same. That's all for property binding. In next video we will learn event binding.